City of Stevens Point Finance Committee meeting, recorded February 10, 2020.
And I see that our new clerk left. I was going to welcome her to her first meeting, so. And anyway, thank you, everyone. The Finance Committee is convened at 7:49 p.m. I would like to ask of the committee if it would be okay to allow item 2 to be heard at our March meeting, because we've got a few people missing. All right, so there's no objection. We will forego the selection of a vice chair until March, and hopefully we'll have a full committee at that time to have a good discussion and nominations. All righty, item 3,
Item
yes,
3
go
has
ahead.
been pulled, so
Item
that
3's been
will
pulled.
also be going to March.
Okay, that'll go to March.
Yep.
And then item 4 is authorization, oops, that's what happens with a touchy pad here. Authorization for the fire department to apply for a FEMA grant. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
And there's a motion.
Second.
And a second. Is there any discussion?
I think, did you want
Yep.
the chief to give an overview?
Chief, if you want
of-
to, I think the memo was pretty clear. You are at liberty to add anything you wish.
Thank you. FEMA opened a grant for equipment or training stuff just last week. Police and Fire Commission approved us applying for a grant. We looked at prioritizing stuff, so we're going to apply up to for $200,000 in EMS training materials. It's a 90-10% match. We get money from the state, the funding assistance program. That's already in the EMS budget, so actually this is going to be at no cost to the city budget whatsoever.
Then I would have
Such a
absolutely.
deal.
Yeah. I wish we could do that all the time. Can you figure that out?
We try.
Okay. All right. Is that all? Any questions of the chief? All right. Anyone else who wishes to comment? Thank you, chief.
Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor and a second. All those, unless there's any other comments from the committee, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed would be no. Abstentions would be aye, and there are none, so the motion carries. Next item on the agenda, discussion on creation of new tax incremental financing districts, otherwise known as TIFs, and I believe I'll let Corey, I thought I had, never mind, I found it. Go ahead, Corey. I had asked him to kind of pull some stuff on to create a visuals, because if you recall, a couple of months ago, we had a discussion at council, and we were talking about, well, imagine this area of the city and this area. I said, I think it would be helpful to have visuals so that we can all be on the same page. Oh, Clerk Kramer is here. I wanted to welcome you to your first evening of committees, so I thought you had left.
Okay. And I apologize, I just. Okay. The only thing okay.
TV doesn't work? Oh, there we go.
Did you break it?
Yay. Hand that on to the sick lady that isn't sick.
All right. So basically, for this presentation, myself and Director Karnowski worked cooperatively on it. So I'm going to cover the first part, which is really the financial overview, go through some of the numbers, the concept of what this whole 12% limit is, and then I'll hand it over to Director Karnowski to talk about specific areas of the city that he thinks we need to look at, or at least consider, have a discussion about as far as development potential. So first of all, I know sometimes when we talk about TIF, it can be this complicated technical kind of a subject that can be a little bit hard to understand. So I thought I'd start off with an analogy. And basically the analogy, the picture is a sign for a gas station, probably in a desert somewhere, and it says last stop 200 miles. And basically what that sign is telling you is you have an opportunity to do something now, to get gas, to stop for if you need any munchies, you need any, maybe to get a bottle of water or something. Now's your chance, because you're going to go through 200 miles of absolutely nothing, and 100 miles into it, you don't want to realize that, oh geez, I really wish I had a bottle of water or something to eat. We're kind of in the same boat with our TIF districts right now, where basically we have the last stop essentially is right now. Sorry, I'm just trying to get this mouse to work. So to just really focus on what you actually need to know, basically in less than 6 months, August 1st, 2020, most likely we will no longer be able to create any new TIF districts or expand existing districts for about 14 years. So I'm thinking probably from now till 2034, we won't be able to identify an area and say, hey, we should create a TIF district here. So what that means is we really need to be thoughtful kind of at our last stop here to say, is there anything that we need to do as far as TIF strategy so that we're set for the next 14 years. And also currently, if we want to create any new districts, they'd be limited to a base value of $20,998,000 or less as far as the total value. However, there's no limit on how many we can create. So for instance, we could create 5 $20 million districts if we wanted to, but we could not create one $22 million district. And you might say, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Here's the thing, TIF law doesn't always make sense, and part of it is because it's written by legislators who don't always understand it.
Corey, how long ago was the very first TIF in the city? Do you recall? I should have asked you that and had you bring that information.
Sure,
so.
Yeah. So, the first TIF in the city predates me.
Okay.
The only, right now, the oldest TIF that we have is TIF 5, and I believe that was opened around 2005, 2006. So, but there were, as far as the years of TIFs 1, 2, 3, and 4, that I would have to dig into the records.
I was just curious. So there were 1, 2, 3, 4s. I didn't know if we just started at 5 and went, that's a nice number.
Yep. No, there would have been 4 TIF districts that existed in the past and were already closed, so.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this mouse to work here.
Yeah. You may have to go to the...
Yeah, I may have to go over here. Okay, so Carrie, could you run just click the slides for me if you could?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. All right, so basically, now, and we actually have to have everything finalized by August 1st, so it is a tight timeline because within this time we have to plan out these districts. We have to have joint review board meetings. The paperwork has to get into the estate.
All of that has to happen.
All of that has to happen. Okay. So we don't have a lot of time. I mean, we can do it, but we don't have time is not on our side, basically. And I would, I guess I do apologize that that's the position that we're in where, okay, we got to hurry up and get this done in 6 months. Certainly a setback for getting this project done was the transition of the community development director. And of course, I don't blame that on Ryan, but I do blame that on Michael. Because,
we all do.
But certainly, and it's just the type of a project where it's a little bit hard to have a new community development director and on his first day say, okay, you need to figure out, what our economic development strategy is going to be for the next 14 years.
Do you know if there ever was a TIF policy that the city ever put together?
I am not aware of a formal TIF policy.
Yeah. It'd be something, I think, for the future, even if nothing can happen by August 1st.
Mm-hmm.
The future council should consider having a policy that
Mm-hmm.
it would have probably helped in the event that we didn't have a community development director, so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Sure. Okay, and then one thing, so if we create these new districts then, even if we cross that threshold as far as being over that 12% limit, we can continue to develop our existing TIF districts, incur costs, and grow tax base in the districts that are already open. So everything continues like normal there. It's just that we can't create any new districts, and we also can't add any additional territory to any districts. So, and then if we can get the next slide. Okay, so now those first two slides were really, okay, just what we need to know. This is a little bit of the details behind it as far as how the 12% limit works. I tried to kind of give you what you absolutely needed to know in the first two slides, so don't feel like you have to follow all of this. But basically, you have the 12% limit to create a new district. So you're looking at that incremental value, which is the amount of increase in value since the TIF district was created. And basically, when you're creating a new TIF district, the Department of Revenue runs a test where they take your total incremental value in all of your TIF districts, and then they also add the base value of the new district that must be less than 12% of your equalized value. So right now, as far as the total incremental value of our 5 existing TIF districts, our current percentage is 11.01%, and $20,998,000 would get us to 12%. And then this is just a breakdown as far as where all of that incremental value is. So you can see the different TIF districts, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. We don't have TIF 10 on here yet, just because that's a new district where no increment has been established there yet. The first column there, or I guess the column in the middle, would be your base values. So that's where they started. Then you have the next column over is the current value, so that's where they are now in terms of value. And then you have your incremental value on the far right-hand column. So that's just what the limit applies to. It just applies to the amount that your TIF districts have actually grown. So actually, that's why we're bumping up against this limit, is because we have seen strong growth in our TIF districts. We've seen strong construction growth. So that's pushed up those incremental values in these districts, especially 5 and 9. If you're looking at, it's actually kind of amazing. Even I was putting those numbers together today, and to think, you look at TIF 5, it's tripled in value, as you can see. Started it at $37.9 million. Now it's $120 million. You look at TIF 9, East Park Commerce Center, started at $58 million. Now $159 million. Again, pretty much tripled in value. So that's a success story.
So in some ways, a successful TIF with nice incremental value serves as a balancing act against gobbling up more and more and more and more in new TIFs.
Yeah, I think to an extent it's almost like saying, okay, you don't really need to.
Because you've demonstrated.
Yeah, because you are growing and you are creating incremental value.
Thanks, Chair. Another way to look at it, if I'm right, is municipalities can go so far in taking all of the increment in taxes while the other taxing entities aren't, right? And then after a certain point, it has to go back to being shared amongst all the taxing entities. Am I understanding that right?
Well, so the only, I guess, caveat that I would add with that is that you can still do development agreements. So for instance, our existing TIF districts, we can still
I see what you're
continue
saying.
to.
It
and
doesn't
there's-
cap- right, okay.
Yeah, and
Right.
we could go from 12 to 15 to 20%.
So your point is that what it's constraining is the number of districts, not the,
Yeah, basically, it's saying, okay, well, if your existing district's already this successful, that you've got, 12% of your total value of your community is TIF increment, you probably don't need to create new ones. You can still develop the ones you have, you can still create tax base there, but you don't really need to pick out a new area and say, okay, let's, do a TIF district. So, yep. Okay, and then this is how those percentages have changed over the last 5 years. So, and again, you can see, actually pretty striking as far as 2015, you had incremental value of about 69.5 million. We were at 4% on the 12% test, and at that point, the thought that we would be at 12% was sort of, I don't think that we really thought we were going to get there at that point. And you can see how it's really consistently grown, and especially, going from 17 to 18, 18 to 19, how that's really accelerated. And part of that, of course, is due to one very significant development.
One North Division.
Yes, that's correct.
Bingo.
And just percentages for a few other municipalities, and sometimes people like to see how we compare. Wausau right now is at 11.67, so I kind of wonder if they're having the same kind of conversation we are. And then you can see we're at 11.01, like I said. Plover 7.52, Marshfield 7.25, and Wisconsin Rapids 1.04%. So, there's some variation there, but we're certainly not outside of the norm or unusual. And then there are municipalities that are over 12%, including some that are way over 12%. And I guess this is the point where certainly if you're on this list, you can't create any new TIF districts, you can't add any territory to any districts, but you can continue to develop the ones that you have. So top of the list is a very small village of Warrens. They're at 69.29%, which is quite a bit. That basically means that 69% of their tax base is TIF increment, and the other 31% can support general services. That's kind of an extreme example, but certainly you can see, there are a number of other communities above the 12%. Weston is at 21%. Marathon City also at about 21%. The Dells at 20%. Wapaka 17.25%. Schofield 12.45%. So just to sort of give you an idea of, we certainly next year won't be the only ones over the 12%. And then, on a final note, I just want to say, because sometimes it sounds really bad to say we have a limit and we're over the limit. And I guess I'd just say, in this case, being over the limit doesn't mean that we did something wrong. It's not like being over the speed limit or being over the legal limit for intoxication. Kind of, as I was putting these slides together, I kept thinking about that commercial that's trying to, prevent drunk driving that says over the limit under arrest. And we're not over the limit in that kind of a way. I think it's more comparable to being ineligible for a tax credit because you're over the income limit. And that's really, I think, a way to look at that. And I just wanted to make that clear because I know sometimes with TIF districts, there can be some confusion. Sometimes the issue is contentious as far as how much the city utilizes TIF, so I just did want to make sure that there isn't any misunderstanding that we're doing something that's wrong or illegal or inappropriate. So, and now I will hand it over to Ryan for the second half to talk about the different areas.
Thank you. Did anyone have questions for the comptroller, treasurer? Oh, thank you.
You can go ahead and click the slide if you don't mind. Yes, sure. Okay, so there's going to be three main areas that staff has more or less been focusing on with the possible creation of additional TIF districts. The north side TIF probably the lowest hanging fruit, if you will, is got some interesting developments in the pipeline. I'm allowed to say this now, but the convent property is currently under a letter of intent to sell. The developer is intending to keep the 1901-1915 structure itself, and thereby demolishing the 1965 addition. They're working on whether or not they keep the chapel. That's kind of up in the air right now. But they're looking at bringing that property back onto the tax roll, doing some redevelopment. There's a nice open field with some nice natural features to it as well, and creating some mixed income, mixed residential development on those two properties themselves. The issue that we're running into is we're talking about some road extensions. The asbestos abatement in the convent itself will cost roughly $800,000. So there is going to be some city assistance if our end goal through economic development is to save or work towards saving as much of the historic convent as possible. So because it's coming down the pipeline, there's currently 17 sisters remaining at the convent, and they are still slowly relocating to Cleveland, Ohio. This is something that we really need to seriously consider. And so because of that kind of low-hanging fruit, there's letter of intent to sell is on the table, and that the convent property could come back on as a possible a tax revenue source for the city. This is something we should probably consider. Now, we could also consider within the North Side TIF to include some of the surrounding neighborhoods for rehab, blight elimination programs funded through the TIF district. The North Side is one of our oldest portions of the city. It is where we have some of the most blighted properties. If you look at our mapping for nuisance violations, for example, this is really where we run into a lot of issues. So are there opportunities for us to help generate new programs or increase existing programs to address the rehab blight elimination component? Again, as I mentioned earlier, the expenses, you could do road utility construction, extension of Schofield Avenue and Meadow Street North. Schofield, we already have the right-of-way planned for, we already own the right-of-way, I should say, for the east-west connecting point. And then, of course, Meadow Street is down on the south side of Maria. You could extend that up to connect to Schofield and create kind of a new neighborhood within there, as an example. And then, of course, the developer incentives from that component being that we've got about $800,000 worth of asbestos abatement, some demolition costs with the removal of the 1965 component. There will be some asks from this developer to make this work. Again, if our end goal is to work towards saving the historic convent structure, the 1901-1915 edition, there will be some city assistance through this process. Miscellaneous notes or anything else, if we extend it further south, do we take the TIF district all the way to the 4th and Division Street intersection and try to pick up some of that property? Do we include an overlay over underdeveloped properties along Division Street within TIF number 5? As some of you may recall, TIF number 6 is now overlaid partially in the Shopco lot, more or less, with TIF number 10. And so there are ways to overlay districts. Because of the success of TIF number 5, this is something that we may want to consider, those underdeveloped parcels or properties along Division Street, including those within that possible TIF district. So you can go ahead and slide to the next one here. So I apologize that they're not easy to see. There are some additional maps near my iPad, but outlined in blue is TIF District number 5. Includes that very nice property on the North Point Drive that is kind of pushing us towards this conversation. But if you can see behind me, Convent is here. Do we include some of this property and come down to 4th Avenue for some redevelopment? That's something I think that staff is going to be putting together and bringing some options going forward, but I just want you folks to be cognizant of this discussion going on. So go to the next one. Are there any questions on the North Side TIF District? Any concerns?
David?
Thanks. If I understood you correctly, there's a high likelihood of looking at some incentive associated with the convent.
Correct.
That sounds like a pretty compelling argument for a TIF, right? If we can anticipate, we're going to have to be paying out an incentive.
Correct.
Isn't it very much in our interests to make arrangements to recoup that?
I would argue that this is, the north side TIF is the most obvious decision to go forward in creating a new TIF district. Again, one of the best ways to save historic structures like the convent is through economic development. And if we have an interest as a community in doing that, then TIFing it, because currently the convent doesn't pay property taxes, so your base value is extremely low. You bring the convent property itself back on, it gets an assessment. The field, if you go
The
back
increment
real
is going to
quick
be
here,
large. Right.
yeah, there's a field to the west of that property that is really prime for some phenomenal, I would call mixed density development. This baseball field is part of the convent property, it goes all the way back here. Schofield Ave extends here. We could extend Meadow Street north to connect up with Schofield and kind of create a new pocket neighborhood up here in the shadows of the convent. We've also talked a little bit, because I'm kind of excited about this project, and it's been more or less at the request of the sisters, that somehow we incorporate a multi-use path or incorporate the green circle onto the convent property and then have some information kiosks on the way talking about the history of the convent and the property, and use the convent, let's say, for example, they would use it for affordable senior housing or affordable housing in general. There's some sense of that historical component of the convent, but incorporating that as part of the master planning process through that. That is an expense that if the city wants to see it, that we're probably going to have to pay for. So, anyway. So, South Side TIF District, it's pretty quiet on the new development side of the Church Street area in general. There are a few available properties. One is city-owned, that's just north of South Point Restaurant. There's, of course, the gas station that, as you come up from the Village of Whiting into the city, is on the east side of the Church Street corridor. That's for sale. But the original business park, which is kind of an interesting idea of mine, is that it's adjacent to Wellesby, Commerce Street. Steel King is in that area right now. Is getting pretty aged. Most of those buildings were built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s before the Stevens Point Industrial Park was developed on the interstate in the 70s and 80s. And that may be an opportunity to set up the city up for long-term success with the redevelopment. We don't know what the long-term plans of those existing tenants are, but if someone, I'm not saying that Steel King's doing this, but if Steel King wanted to build a new facility elsewhere, then this would be an opportunity for the city to maybe through the negotiation process acquire the property or do some of the blight elimination that comes along with some of these older industrial parks. And then additionally, there are some environmental concerns that come along with these older industrial parks as well. This could be an opportunity or tool for the city to use for environmental remediation. But some of the expenses that we might incur with the South Side TIF District, of course, the Business 51 reconstruction. If you drive on Church Street now, it's a concrete highway. Are there opportunities for us to spruce up the corridor as we go through the Business 51 reconstruction plan itself? Environmental remediation, as I mentioned earlier, and then of course, because a lot of these TIF districts and how they work and how society, the economic development world has changed, of course, development incentives should be included as part of that. Other than that, I didn't have any additional notes or ideas when I put this slide together, but if we go to the next slide here, it'll show you just a photo of the general south side of the city. Of course, you got Patch Street up above, and down here to the southern limit. The gas station that's so blighted is right here. And then, of course, the city-owned property is here. And then this general area here, wherein the railroad comes down, that's the original, one of the original industrial parks for the city. So just another thing to think of. And Chair, I'm more than happy to answer any questions folks might have on this slide.
Questions for the director? Go ahead, Alder Shore.
Thank you, Chair. What is this city-owned property of which you speak?
I don't know how we came to acquire it, but there is a vacant lot north of South Point Restaurant that the city owns. My conversations with the former comptroller had something to do with the school parking lot and possible road extensions. Does that sound about right? Okay. And that's all I've gotten out of that conversation. It's about, I think, 3/4 of an acre in size.
Isn't that where Normington's used to be?
Correct.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Long time ago, holy smokes. So, what are you looking for from the committee at this point? I think, obviously, time is of the essence. We've got some ideas. There may be other ideas that alders, any of the alders might be thinking about, but making a strategic decision soon, I hate pressure. But, so our choices are do something or do nothing. If we do something, what does that look like?
Right, and so I think this is just the first step. We're getting the ball rolling here. If there's, you folks know the community a lot better than I do, just being a full-time resident here outside my college days for about a year now. If there are other areas that the finance committee or the council would like to see addressed through a TIF district and blight elimination or mixed-use TIFs or things of that nature, to let me know. These are just conceptually the 30,000
Right.
viewpoint, what
Appreciate
we're
that.
trying to
That's
bring
helpful.
forward. I've got a couple more slides, so you can go ahead. So of course, the east side TIF, pretty quiet. This is I'll call it the far east side, the old Walmart Cops property is kind of listed for sale. Cities received some inquiry into redevelopment, and that includes some developable property, whether it be around the old Walmart or Cops property or, across the street. Expenses, there's some, I think, cost sharing that could come along with, like if the city wanted to do some intersection improvements, and then, of course, development incentives. And, as I've observed the council over the last year, do we really want to be incentivizing fringe development through the TIF district? I think that's the conversation that this council has taken on, and the Strong Towns approach is something that I'm very pro, is kind of saying to me that maybe this is one that we let slide by. But if this is something that the council's passionate about, including as part of a TIF district to redevelop the property, then we can definitely include this as part of it. I will also note that we're pretty limited in what we can do in terms of the physical geographic boundary on the east side because of the town hall surrounding the city's Highway 10 commercial corridor. A lot of the properties that are non-commercial adjacent to Highway 10 are in the town of Hull, and given our boundary agreement and long treasured history with the town, there's a very low chance that we would be able to annex property and include that as part of a TIF district. So you can go to the next slide. And of course, this is just the corridor itself. I said the far east side, there are some other development opportunities, the old Fleet Farm, that's along Maple Bluff Road, that general area. My suspicion would be this would be a much smaller confined TIF district because of the geographic limitations that we're running up against and because of the lack of major acreage and developable property. And then finally, if there are other TIF ideas, again, this is kind of we're getting the ball rolling here because we've got just a few months to get this done, and I'll tell you that it takes typically between 60 and 90 days on a fast track to get a TIF plan put together, implemented, and approved by the state. So we gotta pick up the pace here a little bit. But we had talked about with Stanley Street, do TIF out near the I-39 intersection. There's some land adjacent to the airport that the city owns that we could, through our FAA grants and whatever else, that we could carve out for commercial development. Do we look at doing a hotel or a strip mall development that includes like a rental car facility or gas station to encourage additional municipal airport users at that location as opposed to flying to Central Wisconsin Airport?
Right.
Could we therefore then justify an improved intersection at Green Ave and Stanley Street? So as we go down this path, and one of the challenges that community development professionals have is we've got to look at what we're expecting for new increment that's going to be generated out there. And we've got to look at our expenses and justify that, and looking at performas and making sure that the expenses are met when we start bonding for those types of developments. So this is the last slide. There's one more, sorry, and that's just our existing TIF districts within the city. So for those watching at home, TIF 5 is the blue one up here, Division Street Corridor. TIF 6 is this yellow line. TIF 7 is the AIG building and some of the other industrial parks, business parks, sorry. TIF 8 includes KI Mobility, Spectre Print. TIF 9, of course, East Park Commerce Center and the rest of the business park. And then TIF 10, our newest TIF, encompasses a lot of the area around downtown. So, again, you all have my email. Please, if you've got ideas or suggestions, throw them my way. My hope is to have some preliminary plans put together for the March Finance Committee meeting.
Questions of the director?
A comment that the logic for the north side seems so much stronger than any of the others.
Right.
I'm not aware of general aviation being enough business to
Right.
support, okay.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you feel like we're missing something, say, with the south side, and that we should be considering that more seriously, but it does seem like a district, because of what's anticipated on the convent.
Yeah, the north side and the convent property seems like a no-brainer to me. I think the south side is something we need to seriously consider as the aged industrial park and the users come and go, or they relocate to other facilities that may suit their needs better. I don't want to be in a situation in 14 or 15 years where a property is sat vacant for so long and we're having a really hard time redeveloping it. So I would say the north side for sure, seriously consider the south side. I've got my reservations about the east side, especially the far east, because of the issues outlined. But north side, south side, and then anything else that, the council or the public want the city to consider. As Corey mentioned earlier, this is the last stop, and so we need to be pretty serious in our TIF creation.
My only comment back to you about is general aviation enough to support something there. I have a number of friends who are pilots, and they said, please, they fly typically out of Wausau or Rhinelander, do something to create some vitality in the Stevens Point Airport, because you could see an increase of use. So it's chicken and egg,
Right.
That's what I'm hearing from friends who are pilots. So again, we're not making a decision now, but I think if you can bring back the ideas and, bring some costs and benefits and choices, so we have a slate of things to choose from based on kind of a logical progression of what would be the expected cost, what would be the positive outcomes, what would be the challenges. Basically, I'm asking you to do kind of a cost-benefit analysis
Sure.
of each one of those. So we make a decision. We may make a decision not to move forward with any more TIFs. We could say, that's it. But if we do move forward, I'd like to have that kind of information so we can make a logical decision.
I have a question too.
Oh, go ahead.
What if we created a TIF and nothing happens with it? Then what then?
As long as we are not making improvements in the district, really nothing would happen. If you create a TIF district and no development occurs and there's no expenses within the TIF district, the base value stays the same, and that there's no detriment to the general fund, more or less, because if you're over on your expenses and your increment's not covering enough and you don't have enough other TIF districts to help cover that expense, it can come off of the general levy. which
Although
is-
there are transaction costs in creating a
Right.
district.
Yeah,
Right, yeah, I mean, you're pretty minimal, you're pretty much at that
yeah.
even level. If nothing happens, you don't expend anything within
And then
the
it
TIF.
closes and nothing happened, right?
I mean, one more comment
Yeah.
on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, how long do TIF districts exist? Is there a timeline on that?
Mixed-use TIFs are 21 years, that's the statutory lifetime on a TIF. Blight elimination are 27 years. Industrial, I believe, is 17. So it does change. Communities do have the ability to extend the life of the TIF district if they declare it, I'm blanking on it, distressed. So if a TIF is distressed, it's not generating enough increment to help offset the debt taken out against the TIF, then you can declare it distressed and you can add, I believe, another 6 years on to the life of the TIF so it can further recover additional increment to pay back that debt.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. And then, one more thing about the, looking out towards the airport. On the connection between potential new TIF district and the Green Stanley intersection. We're going to be looking at the Green Stanley intersection. I think on a shorter time scale, and I'm also not sure that we're talking about costs of a scale that really kind of flip into increment financing.
Yeah, I know the Green Stanley intersection was originally included as part of the 2020 capital improvement budget, but was removed, or
Withdrawn.
2021, I can't recall.
Yes.
But yeah, that is an intersection that we know should be addressed at some point. You could throw that area into the TIF district and build the intersection against the TIF district, hoping that future development would occur out on Stanley Street. I'm really cool to the idea of Stanley Street as a TIF, especially in the interchange, because there's a lot of additional steps that we have to take, including a 5-year review process on carving out part of the airport for commercial development. But it's something that we should, I just wanted to have the conversation, because if there is an interest, then it's something that we should move forward on. But it sounds like cut Stanley Street out of this conversation.
I would say, again, you've offered a number of ideas. I'd like to see them a little more fleshed out.
Yep.
So that not only the committee can make a decision, but council can as well. And again, it doesn't have to be a full-fledged CBA, but it should have some fundamental information so that we can understand decision-making. Is this question for the director, Alder? Okay, go ahead, come on. Yep, please.
Thank you. Director, I don't know if this is anything that can be included in this, but at one time, way back, Director Ostrowski talked about putting the university area into a TIF for helping redevelop some of the housing that was there. And nothing has been done in a long time in that area. Right now, we have all of Briggs Street that is being bought by the university from their master plan, which now has been on hold. They still don't own, I think, one property, but their idea was to tear it down, make more parking lot, which is something that we're not for, and then maybe eventually put a building on there, but they've been really pulled back so much that it's caused, I think, a lot of detriment to the vitality of our neighborhoods in that center area there, because these houses are not, that were family homes, are now rented out by the university. And I was told by somebody on the university that their plans have changed so much about parking that may be something that the city could look into as being able to get those properties back, put townhouses in them and make, they don't have to be single-family homes, but they could be some decent townhouses that would be generate some of our tax base back that we've lost from so much of the parking that's been taken away for the use of the university. I'm just throwing it out there, maybe it's a crazy idea, but it's a nice area. It has the streets already, and it has beautiful trees, and it's the one area that's going to end up losing all of that, all the trees that are there that are these full natural big trees if they do end up just keeping it. So I just thought it threw that in there as a nice.
Thank you. Did you want to respond or just add it to the list?
Yeah, we can definitely add it to the list. I'm just thinking through the process, we'd have to do a blight elimination TIF, and then in that development plan, or the TIF plan, we could include things like acquisition of properties, really target blocks that the city would like to acquire, work with the developer, raise the properties, do newer townhomes, do higher density, maybe that isn't hyper-focused on student housing. We're kind of in this really interesting time in the city wherein we have new student housing going up on the north side. A lot of our student housing landlords recognize that I think the days of them making a lot of money on their student rentals are coming to an end. And so a lot of them are for sale right now. So this might be a prime opportunity for the city to start doing some acquisition for the purpose of redevelopment.
Alder Jennings, is it a question for the director? Okay. Director, thank you very much. Have we provided enough direction?
I think so.
All right, thank you.
Corey Jennings, Alder District 1. I tend to support TIF in the core of the city, and I like the idea of the north and south for sure. Absolutely not the east side, and I just have to comment on Stanley Street because the idea of the hotel came up. I would like the Finance Committee to be very, very cautious about such things. You build something like that or make it even a possibility, and then that plants the seed for all the other kinds of businesses that go with that. Oh, so now we need a McDonald's, now we need this, now we need that. The point is to make it easy for people to get from the airport into the core of the city, to stay at all the great places we have in town, not spread the city out in that direction. So I feel these are things I feel very strongly about. So kudos for north and south side, like it. Other stuff, no. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Awesome. You have your direction. This should be, even though it's a tight timeline, I'm looking forward to the discussion. Anything else, Corey, to add to that? You're both done, apparently.
Yeah, the only other thing, I think the question about expenses is a good one, and I'll put something together.
I know that's a rough one, but.
Yeah, but I'll put something together and email that, because obviously you do have annual audit costs, which run about $1,500, and that's charged to the TIF district. And then you have the fees for TIF creation. And in the big scheme of things, as far as all the financial activity that you could have with a TIF district, it doesn't end up being a lot, when you look at it that way. But I think still important for the conversation to sort of understand what the expenses would be.
And you can asterisk those saying, these are only estimates, please.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Item 6, request for proposals for developing 1116 Main Street, which is the former home of the Fox Theater. Director?
So included in your packets are the request for proposal for the Fox Theater. My hope is to have this approved by the Finance Committee tonight, and then further approved by the City Council next week, so we can issue the RFP on March 2nd. You'll see that we did allow I would call a further timeline than typically you would have for a request for proposal and offer to purchase. The final submission is due June 5th, so plenty of time for interested parties to walk through the property, to put together their development plans and submit it to the city for consideration. Maybe different than what the city has done in the past, but I do hope to have a small selection committee to bring, I'll call our top tier of proposals to City Council for final consideration. And that can be done through the point system that I've included as well. I know Comptroller Laddick and I discussed this earlier. We're going to do some tweaking to the total points awarded. It's just an ability for us to review proposals as they come in. It doesn't have a lot of leverage, but if one comes in at 120 total points, and another comes in at 100, it provides some additional guidance for that selection committee and who to decide to bring forward to the council for final consideration. We did not hide anything in this RFP. The donation agreements included, the historical nominations included, other than just a few minor typos of mine that I saw here. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or comments that the body may have.
Questions for the director? I appreciated the extended timeline and the very open approach to providing all of the information that could be a problem, or at least may take longer for a developer to consider a solution. So I appreciated that. Any questions from the audience? All right, this is an action item, barring some technical amendments or changes, correcting language or other things. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion to move forward with the RFP as presented with minor changes.
I would second.
And there is a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, no. Abstentions, motion carried. Thank you, Director. You should have your direction. And, hang on, let's get back to my 1 minute. There we go. The next item is 7, approval of claims paid. Were there any questions from committee? Any questions from the audience about the claims paid? There were some big payments in there this time. Taxes.
Yes, there were. So we do collect for all the jurisdictions, including the county, the school district, and the tech college. And then in January, we do make a payment to them for what we collected in December. So those are some big payments, but of course, that was never really our money. We just collected it for them. And then also some fairly large debt payments.
Yeah, I saw that.
As well. We like to make some significant debt payments at the beginning of the year, especially since we're bringing in all the tax revenue. We try to match that the money goes out at the same time that it's coming in.
Wonderful.
So, yep.
And again, thank you for the larger claims. It really helps.
I move approval of the claims paid.
There is a motion on the floor. Is a second?
I second.
All righty, and barring any other discussion, I don't see hands being raised and people jumping up and down with excitement. Therefore, we will call the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. The motion carries. The next item, and my understanding, Corey, has the chief talked to you about pulling item B. He had to leave for the closed session.
Oh, okay.
To allow it for next month. The Chief Skiba had to leave.
Oh, okay. Well, I think we pretty much have that one figured out as far as an acceptable solution for everybody. So
Wonderful. We'll talk more at another time. So item 8 minus item 8B at this time, it may come back. We will, if those are in favor, adjourn into closed session approximately 7:45. That is inaccurate. It is 8:45 or 8:43.
We had an optimist writing the
Yeah,
schedule.
we had an optimist. Pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85 paren 1 paren E, for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session on the following. And again, we are going to forego anything on item B at this time. Item A, negotiating the terms of sale of city-owned property. This requires a motion and then a roll call vote. I would entertain a motion.
and
You always want to be the
Moving to go
second,
into
or do you
I
want to be the
guess I move
first?
to approve. Sorry. I move to approve.
We have a motion to move into closed session and a second.
So it is roll call.
Yep, a roll call vote.
Shore,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Fischler.
Aye.
That was a short roll call.
Videos of these meetings are available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.